All right, well, hello, fellow Rotarians. You guys all have a good, relaxing drive into work today? I'm sure you did. Go into your office. I want to show you how my friend Grant goes to the office every day and what his drive-in looks like. Does that sound? A lot better with sound. Oh, there you go. Yeah, well done. Well done. That's 125 miles an hour right there, 140. Down to 65 in about that amount of time. Guys, that is one lap at the Indianapolis 500 Motor Speedway. That was pretty impressive. I'll tell you what, for a 21-year-old driver. So my guest today is Grant Palmer. Grant is a professional race car driver. I met Grant through his dad, Tony Palmer. Tony's with us back here today. He's my guest. He's back there at the back table. Tony actually took my place when I left management at State Farm to go be an agent in town. Tony took my spot. So he's basically my boss, and glad to have him here today. But he introduced me to Grant, and I just thought the story was really cool and what he did. They live over in St. Charles, and Grant's going to tell you a little bit about kind of his experience getting started. Tony was telling me that Grant only had about 15 minutes in that car on that speedway before that started, and most of the other kids that were in that race had an hour and a half to 2 hours of practice time. So Grant's a really good race car driver. So he's going to come up and tell you a little bit about himself. Grant.
So this is new to me, and I'm sure it's new to all of you to have a race car driver here. So yeah, so this was last year at Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Grand Prix weekend, and for a solid, how long was it? About 4 hours. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to do the race because we had a gearbox issue before we had even done the first practice session. So the team scrambled around, and I was looking over all the data, trying to figure out the track before I'd even driven it. And they found a gearbox for me to put on the car. And by that time it was already qualifying. So I had about 15 minutes to learn the track and had to start the race last. And so I started, I believe, 26th place. And by the end of this first lap, I was in 13th. So a lot of people ask how it all started. It started for me in the go-karts over at Gateway, actually. They've got a little go-kart track inside of the oval there, and they've got a racing program to help kids learn how to race and work on a kart. And it's just the foundation to motorsport. So my dad took me over there. This was in 2015, around July or August. And they kind of gave me the first choice. Are you going to... Not the first choice, but they gave me a choice. Are you going to save up for your first car, or are you going to buy this go-kart? And I had been working at a hobby store locally, and I decided we're going to buy this go-kart, and then you'll have to drive me to the track every weekend. So it was, I think for me, it was a good deal. So I got to spend a lot of time with my parents at the track. And one thing led to another, and we started going into the racing series, and we ended up traveling across the country racing go-karts nationally. And they weren't just regular, you put your seatbelts on go-karts. These were go-karts that run 60 to 80 miles an hour. And so we ended up at Daytona 6 months into my first season. for the WKA National, and we finished 13th place out of, I believe, 35. So next year we decided we're going to move up a level to a faster kart. And one thing led to another, where we got a few phone calls and recommendations to race in California with a team called Phil Giebler Racing. Phil was the 2007 Indy 500 Rookie of the Year. And a few years prior, he'd been fighting for the Red Bull seat in the Formula One team. And then once I started racing with Phil, he taught me a few things through, whether it was racecraft, engineering, racing theory, I call it, just thinking quick in the driver's seat. And once I'd started performing well the next 2 years, this is between 2016 and 2018 now, we decided we're going to go to a racing school, because those are actual things where they teach you how to race a car. One thing that people don't know is that it costs money to go racing. So through this whole time, I'm doing random jobs, working at hobby stores, building computers for people, trying to find sponsorship or investors to go racing. And then we took the gamble and went to racing school, and that went really well. The racing school had their own racing series, where I believe we finished 6th place in the championship that year. And I had only run 3 races because that was all I could afford. And Phil, sometime right after I graduated from high school, called and said, "You're going to have a test drive with a local team in a Formula 4 car." And a lot of people ask me, what's a Formula 4 car? Anyone follow Major League Baseball at all? So Formula 4 is like the single A version of Formula 1. It's where people come in, it's a feeder system up the ladder into the top of the sport. So we went to go test with a local team, and we decided we're going to try and raise money to race with this team. Through 2019, we'd been testing with them and testing and testing and testing. I'd been getting faster and faster until a team from the United Kingdom called. So 2020, we decided we're going to sign on with a team in the United Kingdom. And I had to live in the United Kingdom during COVID. So I had to sleep in a pink room to go racing, pretty much. So lived over there for about 6 months, had a really amazing season, and it was an experience that not everyone who had been there had gotten to experience before, because it was the first time anything like that had ever happened, where 2 drivers from America had to stay over there because of COVID. So my teammate and I, we flew back home and decided we're going to figure out what to do next year. And I went on to the USF 2000 series, which is in this video. And it's a bit like the Formula 4 car, but faster. And it's on, instead of it being on the Formula 1 scale, it's on the IndyCar side of things, which is IndyCar is more North American motorsport, whereas Formula 1's more worldwide. So this year, 2022, there wasn't much racing. We did some testing with Al Unser Jr. and his team, Future Star Racing. They have a foundation that helps drivers get some funding, some extra funding to go racing where they need it. So anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask.
What's your ultimate goal for a ride? Would it be an IndyCar or Formula 1?
So the ultimate goal would be IndyCar, because it's, I believe there's more benefits for businesses to work with me, because 80% of being a race car driver is actually being a businessman. So a small story I've got is one of my mentors, he drove for a large race team in the early 2000s. And he called Pepsi and asked for sponsorship from them. And Pepsi said, our main priority is not being on a race car, it's being at the front of every store, or at the front of every Target. So between 2000 and 2014, when you walked into a Target, where did you see the Pepsi? It's at the front of the store. And he called Target, asked them to move the Pepsi to the front of the store, and they said, sure. we'll do that. And then as long as you put us on the race car. So the ultimate goal would be IndyCar because I believe it's more affordable. There's more business opportunities than for local businesses here in America than having, State Farm race on a race car somewhere in Germany. So, yeah, that's the ultimate goal would be to race IndyCar. I believe you had a question?
Do you play for teams that are non-sponsors to hire the driver?
So the driver has to find funding to go racing, whether they come from an individually wealthy family or they have to go door to door trying to find sponsors or investors to go racing. I believe the lady in the back had her hand up first. No. So they are all actually very different. This track, I believe, was about 4 miles and it's a wide flowing track, whereas 2 weeks before, we were actually on a street course in St. Petersburg where they closed down part of the street and an airport runway for us to race on. So every track is going to be different. They can have the same shape, but due to them being in different locations, even the altitude above sea level can make a difference. I think you.
My son races out there with you, Gateway. What do they call it now? Break that. Yeah, some other guys that run down Charlotte Motor Speedway in Scottsdale, driver training school. I've never raced there, but I turned a lap or two at about 165 miles an hour.
Yeah, did you like it?
I know a lot about you because I hear it from my son all the time about where you're racing, what you do. He's pretty proud of it. He's a little older, but his racing started to track off a little bit. But I just to say that people that don't know much about it, backing it up. This young man is really, really good.
Thank you.
What's the fastest you've gone?
The fastest I've gone is about 180 miles an hour. We'll go here since
You
I,
mentioned you went to racing school.
yes.
What techniques did they teach you, or what did you learn that stood out to you?
So they teach you a little bit about awareness and where you're looking on the track. You're never just looking 5 feet out in front of you. You're looking for different types of reference points because you need focus. You need to focus on objects that are way down the road when you're moving at a speed. And then they teach you a little bit about controlling the car and a little bit of physics where you're not really just steering the car with your hands. You're actually using the acceleration and deceleration to help control the car.
That was actually a question. Is like, so you take that video, for example, you're going 100+ miles an hour, 65 miles an hour at a turn. You're literally, I mean, there's times where you're probably tapping other cars, or you can see a car coming towards you. You're also mindful of the fact that you have to keep going forward on the track. So you just try to describe what your mindset is, like when you're sitting there, and are you reacting? What's your mindset?
We'll
Focused
go.
on 50 feet down the track while moving forward.
So
and then you're in your periphery, you're seeing the cars just kind of dart in and out of your sideline.
yeah, you're pretty much, there are certain times where you're just reacting to what's going on. So like here at the start, I decide I'm just going to nail it. And right about here, you can see I commit a little bit to the right, and then I see this gap on the left. So I just reacted to that and went down the middle of the track. And going into turn one, I had made up my mind. I'm going to brake at the 500-foot marker instead of the 800 feet and pray that everyone else hits the brakes before me. So I kind of already had that planned out, and it almost ended the race early right here.
Right there, react real time. I mean, that's faster than
Yes.
And the gas matters.
Yes. So the biggest thing that I think actually also translates over to driving on the way here is making a decision and committing to that decision. Because I believe most accidents happen where someone thinks about a move and then someone else is not sure what the other person's going to do and then they have a crash. So it's just deciding, making calculations, deciding which one's the right one, and then sticking to that one. And if something happens, you have to own it.
And just like being a major league hitter, your ability to process that in, like I say, a hundredths of a second is what differentiates you from less than car drivers.
Yeah.
And
So
these are the best drivers in the league.
yeah, that's one of the key factors would be reaction time and just decisive or decision making.
The only problem I have is I got to be 82 years old. It doesn't work with all the reactions as well. At 82 as it did at 20 and 30 years.
I think someone had their hand up over here really quickly.
Oh, right. You know, the simulators play part of this now, you know, like pilots, you know, there's no way to the air, the cracks, and so we go to school, or is that part of the training? You're not always on a track.
Yeah, so there are simulators out there that certain drivers use. Some drivers just don't believe in it because one of my teammates would race on the simulator all the time, and he came from New Zealand. And his first time in the car at the test day, he had a crash because in the simulator, he was able to put his car on part of the track and get a quicker lap time. But in reality, as he put his tire over the curbing on the inside of the corner, it actually lifted the car up and spun it out. And then he had a crash and he thought, well, on the simulator, I was able to do that. But I think a simulator is very good for learning the direction and certain tracks where there's a crest and you have to just trust that over the crest, it goes downhill to the right. It's very good to learn the driver eye level of what's going on. I don't think it's very good to learn the actual control because it's never going to simulate that real sense of speed that you get in depth perception, but it's still a big key.
Who's your favorite race car driver or athlete and why?
So I used to watch NASCAR as a kid when we lived in Chicago. And my favorite driver was Tony Stewart for NASCAR. And then Formula One was Michael Schumacher. And he drove for Ferrari, and Michael Schumacher drove for Ferrari. In his first championship, he won it in a Benetton. And does anyone remember Benetton back in the 80s, the clothing manufacturer? They owned a race team. And he was so fast that he'd beaten the top teams in a clothing manufacturer's F1 team. So, and he became a 7-time world champion, and it's a record that stands to this day. It's currently tied, but it's still a standing record of 7-time world champion.
I'm looking for some tips on my ability to improve my drafting.
So for open wheel cars with wings, we try to draft a little bit, which would be, for people who don't know, drafting is when you get behind another car, they sort of create a pocket of air for the car behind, and it creates less drag on the car. So it's like you've got less air pulling the car back. And so drafting, you just kind of sit behind someone, you can close in up on them and then pull out to pass them. We typically try to search to not draft because it keeps the car a little bit cooler. And then because we've got wings and it creates that pocket of air, suddenly there's no air over the front wing and the front of the car has no grip. So there are certain times where you want to draft and other times where you don't. It gets pretty technical sometimes.
Maybe you guys should listen to this answer. I want to go about a speeding ticket.
I have never gotten a speeding ticket because I don't speed. I don't get a trophy for getting here on time, so I'm not going to speed.
What's your favorite automobile to drive when you're not racing?
I drive an old 2001 Audi S4. Yes.
Okay, so About how much would you say goes, I've seen the setups at races and tires and the engines and the brakes and all that. What would you say an average race costs a driver?
At the USF 2000 level, the average race, assuming there's no crash, is about, depending on where they're at, because travel is taken into effect, about $45,000 to $70,000 per race weekend. And some drivers are able to pay that out of pocket. Other drivers are looking for ways to make businesses money so that they can sponsor drivers to pay for that cost.
Is there a max number of sponsors?
There is not.
No.
So if I had 75 people sponsor me at $1,000 each, I would be able to race the Bomberito 500 next year.
Yeah.
And I could have the car covered in sponsor logos, social media would be covered, and just anywhere I needed to be for a sponsor to do an event, I would be there.
So each one of us gave you $1,000 using all of our names.
Yes.
I'd be worth it.
I would think it would definitely be worth it. And there's more to just the way that we do sponsorship is we try to find ways to help grow businesses, whether it's through marketing, branding, networking, and then there's also ways we can get tax write-offs for businesses, and that's a bit of a longer conversation. So there's a lot of ways to end up on a race car and grow the business.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's on the handout? I don't know if you're familiar with it. Tony handed them out. Tony, what's on the handout that we put on the table?
On the handout that's on the table, Alan Jr. is the chief director of talent for Future Star Racing, and Nick Factory is one of their drivers. They work alongside all the basically it's a charitable foundation that will actually identify racers. They will actually help cover the cost through donations for racers to go racing. They've done this with the lady who was in Europe, her name is Chloe Chambers. She runs the W Series, which is the all-women's Formula 3 series in Europe. And they've also done this most recently for a woman named Francis Jr., who now is Indy Lights, but he did it for his career since he was 13, so he's like 23 years of age. And grants certified by Alan Jr. Is going to carry.
Grant, best of luck to you.
Thank
Any
you.
more questions? It's definitely a first for me, having a race car driver. SCCA family and home nursery, we're going to give to this lovely flower.